Hey everyone, welcome back. And before we launch into this new episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast, I wanted to talk a little bit about this new network that the podcast is a part of now, being the Extreme Performance Outdoor Network. And it's a media network that was created by Houndsman XP, and they wanted to, of course, showcase houndsmen, but also they wanted to continue to incorporate other types of outdoor and hunting podcasts into the overall network and just kind of feature different, unique needs and goals that the outdoor and hunting community as a whole faces. And it became apparent to me pretty quickly after talking to these guys how passionate they were about the overall mission of preserving hunting and hunters' rights and things of that nature that affects, of course, falconers as well. So, I mean, I really wanted to become part of a network that had a mission that was, of course, bigger than ourselves in a lot of different ways. And, I'm really happy to be collaborating with these guys now. And they're really, like I said, a passionate group of guys and really work hard to, kind of take control of the hunting narrative in a positive way. So I'm happy to be part of this new network. And as of March 1st, you should be able to listen to all of the podcasts that are a part of the network on the main network feed, which you can search out at Extreme Performance Outdoors Network. Extreme is with an X at the beginning. And you can not only listen to the Falconry Chronicles podcast on that feed, but all the other shows as well, which I would highly recommend because there's a lot of good stuff that these guys have to offer. Please give them a chance if you haven't already. So anyway, just wanted to let you all know more of the reasoning and logic behind joining a bigger network. And I think it's only going to mean positive things for everyone involved. And I'm really happy to be a part of it. And now that I've said my piece and informed you all of all that stuff, on to the show. Here we go with the next episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast.
This Cooper's hawk came out, and this Merlin just started bombing that Cooper's hawk. It just kept bombing it. And it forced it actually into, there was a building with a fence, a fence keeping the pheasants in, an enclosure. And that Cooper's hawk, it bombed that Cooper's hawk right into the corner to the point where I went over and picked up the Cooper's hawk.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks again for joining me for another great episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast, and I've been really excited to bring this episode out to you all. This episode features Ken Felix, and for those of you that aren't familiar with Ken, the reason why I was excited to bring this episode to you all is because Ken was one of the guys, or last few guys, I should say, remaining that were like true second-generation falconers, and that they learned from some of the original falconers that were practicing falconry first in our country. So, that being said, there's not many guys like him that are left in our falconry community at this point, and I've just been really excited to release this episode for you all. And special thanks again to Seth Roy for helping to make this episode happen. And like I said, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to this episode now with Ken Felix. So enjoy. Here we go. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Ken. It's really good to meet you. I'm glad that Seth reached back out to me and thought of including you in all this. I hear that you're a guy that's kind of been around a minute and has seen a lot of things in falconry, and you're also from a part of our country that is, like you were saying before, kind of known as the original, I guess, hub of falconry. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, it's good to meet you, and I'm really excited to talk to you more in this conversation and pick your brain a little bit.
Go ahead, Al. There's slim pickings in there, but I'll let you at it.
Well, and if at any point, you have anything that you want to add or interject or whatever, you feel free to jump in. All right. So.
I just want to say one thing is that I feel that our generation, that is people who got into falconry in the mid-'60s to the mid-'80s, and I was the one in the late '60s, benefited. It's been the biggest benefit that we came in at a time when there was all kinds of game everywhere, but there was no information. There really wasn't. And so then NAFA came in and they started having some in the 60s, started having some information. And we were fortunate enough to be the first ones to have both many raptors available, much game, unbelievable amount of game available, and finally some communication between falconers.
Yeah, and a lot of the guys that I talk to that are from, I've talked to at least a handful that have kind of started before there were rules and regs, kind of from the same era and all of that. And there's always kind of this resounding, I guess, common denominator between all of you guys, it seems, in that basically, yeah, it was a struggle getting into it, but at the same time, it was easier to kind of work out and learn, from the mistakes and different things and stuff, mainly because there was just so much more land to hunt and so much more game to try and, prey base to try and hunt on. Right.
And communication. That's the big thing that happened in the mid 60s on. Before that, they were flying by the seat of their pants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, as far as, around that era, sure, I'm sure that some of the long distance calls and things like that could get kind of pricey if you were communicating with people across the country. But I'm sure that exchanging ideas and thoughts and stuff like that via snail mail was probably a little inconvenient, though, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So, as far as, is there anything in particular that, from whenever you got your start, what was it exactly that you felt was, I guess, expounding on those things a little bit? What was the hardest thing for you getting into all this?
Well, I had no trouble getting into it. I got my first bird when I was 12. My uncle climbed a tree and gave me a baby red-shouldered hawk because I had been bugging him about the hawks for probably a couple of years. And anyhow, and I killed it. It was a baby. I didn't feed it properly. It died. My dad was encouraging. We built a muse outdoors, maybe out the outdoor weathering area in Muse. And anyhow, probably that's the reason when I felt so bad that bird died, that's probably one of the main reasons I became a veterinarian, really. It wasn't going to happen again.
What age did you say you were again at that point?
I was 12.
Okay.
Yeah, there was no rules or regulations then. Zero.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of guys that kind of have a similar experience to that. It's like, there's really wasn't too much in the ways of books or any kind of, just reference material on how to take care of something like that. So.
Right. It was 1959. So,
yeah. Well, whenever you were a kid, did you manage to find anything that was somewhat of a help to you in that regard, or?
Nothing that was helpful. I had the encyclopedia and I looked it up, but there was nothing. There was no other falconers that I knew of to talk to. I lived in semi-rural, maybe rural northwestern Pennsylvania. There was no other falconers. There was nobody. And so, but I went to veterinary school in 1968, and there was a big hiatus there between 60 and 68 when I was in high school and college. And you don't do anything with falconry when you're in high school and college if you have no money and no information. So,
yeah.
But anyhow, when I got to veterinary school at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, I met some falconers, and they took me under their wing, and it was easy.
Okay, so did you, whenever you were still a kid, though, even before you got into high school, did you try to do anything else with any other birds or anything in that kind of gap there? Or?
No, what happened was when I got this bird, I was 12 years old, and I called the local game protector for information about falconry. And he said, well, you got to get a bird. And I said, well, I have a bird. He said, do you know what it is? And I said, yeah, it's a red-shouldered hawk. He says, well, those are protected. You can't have one. And you can't do this. You can't do that. So you can't do anything. So I just dropped it then and there. And that was it. I didn't even think about it. I loved falcons and hawks all my life as a kid. I mean, I was just enamored with them, and hunting too, and predators. Let's put it that way. And then when I met the falconers in Philadelphia, Corny McFadden and Bill McBride and those guys, Joe Harmer, Lou Oyst, then the whole world opened up to me. Bob Berry, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, and so, I mean, going through vet school and everything, I mean, was there still, I'm assuming there was probably still a strong desire during that time, to get into it, right? You never lost any kind of motivation or anything like that, or?
Well, no. Once I met those guys, they told me about two very famous people in the world of falconry. One was Dr. Robert Stabler, who was the head of parasitology at the University of Pennsylvania Veterinary School, and unfortunately left there the year before I started. But I corresponded with him over snail mail, and he was the one who discovered that Trichomonas gallinae, the parasite that caused frowns in falcons and hawks, and how to cure it. And so that saved the lives of thousands and thousands, maybe millions of birds of prey. And then secondly, there was another gentleman who was a student at the veterinary school, but graduated a year or two before me, named Scotty Ward, F. Prescott Ward. And he's the gentleman that did the research by trapping peregrines on the Outer Banks and finding and going to their nests and so forth, and finding, well, he found out about the eggshell sickness at the peregrine eyries, but that was caused by DDT. And so he was the one who actually proved that. And there's one that saved millions and millions of falcons. Hawks. So I never did meet either of them personally, but I corresponded with both of them frequently, and I'm just proud to say I knew them somehow.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you kind of lucked into that kind of, I guess you could even call it kind of like a treasure trove of knowledge in a way.
Yes, I did. I just stepped into it and it hit me in the face.
Well, and whenever you were in vet school, did you always know that you were wanting to kind of did you specialize more in the avian side of things, or did you?
No, I was going to be a general practitioner, but you had to do a senior laboratory project. And so what I did for mine was, there was a problem with captive birds of prey having thiamine deficiency. And so what I did was I trapped 16 raptors, 8 kestrels and 8 redtails, and tested all of them, wild birds, and tested them all for thiamine deficiency, and none of them had it. And so that just proved that it was the diet that captive bred birds were getting. So anyhow, but everybody knew it was a B vitamin deficiency, but I just happened to prove that it doesn't occur in the wild, at least in the small 16 bird sample that I had. But it was fun, and it was a great project, and I got a good grade for
it. Well, I mean, just kind of out of curiosity then with that, whenever you did get into falconry a little bit more, hot and heavy later on, I mean, did that study and some other things that you learned during, I mean, I don't see how it couldn't, but I mean, did that and other things that you learned during your vet school kind of tenure change what you decided to, I don't know, regulate your raptors on as far as diet and, any kind of supplemental vitamins or anything? Or
Absolutely.
Sure,
absolutely.
it did.
And the main thing it did, and you're going to laugh at this, but the main thing it did was said that I am never going to fly. And to this day, I've never flown a goshawk and I've never flown a gyrfalcon. I've flown plenty of other birds, but neither of those species. And the reason is because in those days, wild goshawks and wild gyrfalcons all died of aspergillosis. And I was not going to have another bird die on me after that red shoulder baby died. So I have never flown a goshawk or a gyrfalcon and never will.
That's
I know, yeah.
yeah. Go ahead.
I know that's not true today with the captive breeding in medical medicine, modern medicine, everything, but it still scares me to death.
That's funny though, that in a way, well, it's not funny, but it's kind of, I don't know. It's interesting that even into your later, a little bit older years, and after you become a vet and everything, like the PTSD from the dead red shoulder is still something that was impacting you that much.
It's probably the reason I became a veterinarian. It hit me that hard.
Man, yeah. I mean, and as horrible as it is to say, I mean, and when it comes to different experiences, research and things, I mean, sometimes it takes experiences like that to kind of shift some people's paths for the better. And, it's kind of interesting how many discoveries and just medicine in general have kind of occurred because, of the deaths of certain animals and people and stuff. It's, I mean, I think if people really understood how much of our medical base was the foundation of it was based on a lot of that, I think people would be really astounded.
Yeah. And the other thing is that a few years before I got that red shoulder, we had horses and ponies when I was a kid, and I had a pony having trouble having a foal, and my grandpa came over. He was a farmer. He couldn't get that foal out, and my dad was there, and he couldn't get that foal out, and they were my two most impressive people in the world, the people I admired most, and they couldn't do it. And they had a guy come over, and he got that foal out. And I said to Dad, I said, who's that? He said, he was a veterinarian. I said, I mean, I was probably about 8, 9 years old, maybe. And I said, I don't even know what a veterinarian is. He said, that's an animal doctor. I said, there's a doctor? And I saw him. He probably gave him $2. And I said, you mean he gets paid for taking care of animals? I said, yep. So that impressed me too. So then when the bird died, that was the logical next step. And I can say this with honest truth. I went to a prep school for high school, and in the yearbook, they ask you what you're going to do after graduation. And not one of the students in my class said they were going to be insurance men, but about half of them are. And I was one of the only ones, I think, myself and a lawyer were the only ones who predicted at senior high school what they were going to be when they really went into adult life.
Well, I mean, that's good. I mean, there's always at least a handful out of every class, it seems like, that to whatever capacity are so focused, even at a young age, that they know what they're going to do later on. But the rest of them just kind of seems like they meander through life a little bit, But yeah, everybody finds their own paths. And I mean, it sounds like it's a good thing that you have found yours. I mean, I'm always happy for people that are able to find kind of that purpose early on.
Yep.
Yeah. So
I agree.
Yeah. And so as far as just kind of going back to your early days in falconry, then, I mean, whenever you stumbled into this kind of treasure trove of guys, as far as, to learn from and stuff, but just kind of start going into a little bit of detail on what, some of your early learning experiences were like from some of these guys. And was it like a more of a one-on-one type of deal, or did they all have some degree of influence on you?
They all did. There were certainly some individuals who were more influential, but I've got to tell you that back in those days, and I'm talking in the late 60s in Pennsylvania, falconry was basically primarily people going out with falcons and throwing them bad game. And that's what it was. Mm-hmm. And so I used to go with the group. There was a whole group of people that went, and I won't name any names, but that's what was going on. And this minion, one of the guys my age, young guy in his 20s, came up to me and said, "Do you want to see some real falconry?" And his name was Joe Seibel. And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Come with me." And he had a red tail. And we went to the dump, and we caught rats at the dump. I said, "This is really cool. This is actually wild All right. So then, of course, then he took me to other places when we caught rabbits too, and with this same red tail. And so that's the first thing that really changed. And falconry, because of the young guys like Joe Seibel and Joe Harmer and Bill McBride and those guys that were younger than the old guard, they changed falconry from bag game to actual hunting.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot about that. Back in those times, it was a lot more of flying and lure flying and some of the aspect of those things, and it really wasn't until a little bit later that the actual the people started to really kind of figure out how to really actually hunt with their birds.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, what was kind of the path like for you then? I mean, did you start off with a red tail? How did that kind of progress for you?
Well, Joe Seibel, this guy, he's the one who taught me how to trap, and we'd go up to the Kittatinny Ridge near Hawk Mountain, and that's how we trapped those birds for the project when I was a senior. And so after I graduated, I had time. I wasn't in school. I wasn't living in Philadelphia, and so I got my falconry permit and I met a great falconer in Erie, the only one that was there besides me. His name was Rod Gerlein, and he had a red tail at the time. And Rod and I went out and I trapped a red tail, and we started hawking with our red tails.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and rabbits and squirrels and whatever we could catch.
So yeah, I mean, I'd always heard though that like as far as red tails go, there was a period of time there where they kind of weren't really anywhere near the known commodity that they are now. And, I mean, I heard it was kind of a situation where, people weren't really using or didn't really understand their value fully yet. And I mean, so was it around a little bit before you kind of got into falconry then that they started being kind of known, or was it already kind of a known thing, but people just weren't really using them yet?
Well, what happened was that the young guys getting in, the older people didn't tell them where the goshawk nests were, didn't help them trap, didn't didn't allow them to take peregrines, and so only the Scaboogie guys, the minions, had red tails, and the upper echelon, if you'll have it, looked down upon them. But those were the guys that were having fun and killing stuff, So they were known, but they were just considered, falconry is goshawks and peregrines. Traditionally, that's what falconry was in Europe and here. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Gotcha. Yeah. So as far as these other guys that started using some of these other, types of raptors, then, I mean, were there any other guys that were outside of your circle that were teaching them also, or was it all pretty much the same guys? Because I mean, I know there were other guys that were kind of learning on their own and stuff too, but
Harris hawks actually came in about that time too, earlier than most people realize, and people saw. Then when clubs started forming, state falconry clubs at the meets, the peregrines, and of course that was after the 72 when they were no longer 76 or whatever it was when they were on the endangered species list and everything. Peregrines weren't available. Goshawks were hard to find. The ones that were passage birds died of aspergillosis, and so then red tails and Harris hawks took off, and Cooper's hawks.
Okay, yeah, I had always kind of wondered about how that natural progression went. I mean, you hear a bunch of people talk about it, but if falconry was viewed mainly as peregrines and a couple of these other types of birds, and people were starting to kind of struggle obtaining those types of birds or couldn't obtain them, I mean, it's kind of it seems a little ironic in a way that, you were in an era where there was so many possibilities for hawking, with so much more land, so much more prey base and everything. But then the types of birds that you were able to fly then were kind of starting to get taken away from you. So, I mean, like, I can understand then why people, even if they were a little bit more reticent or didn't want to kind of accept some of these other raptor species, were kind of forced to be, a little bit, accepting in a way, because that's all you could really do after a certain amount of time, right?
Right. And it was fun. And it was actual. If you look at the definition of falconry, which is the taking of wild quarry, its natural state and habitat by means of a trained raptor, flying bad game isn't falconry.
No.
It's not. And so when we started forming clubs, I was going to say, we'd have meets, and those guys that just flew bad game with their falcons, nobody gravitated towards them. They gravitated towards the guys that were out actually practicing falconry.
So as far as, were you involved then in any of the, like the formation of some of the early clubs and stuff like that where you were at, or?
Oh yeah, I was, what happened, Joe Seibel, that friend of mine who I mentioned earlier, he was an obscure falconer. Nobody knew him outside of Philadelphia. And he sent out a letter to every licensed falconer asking them to attend a meet in Burn Cabins, PA, which is in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, and see about forming a club, because the federal regs were going to come out and we needed somebody to act as a unified voice to the Pennsylvania Game Commission to adopt the federal regs. 60 of us showed up, actually, which was big. I mean, Pennsylvania, you'd be surprised. I think California is the only state club that has more members than the Pennsylvania club. Great Lakes involves more than one state. But anyhow, so we met in 76. We formed the club that year, and I was elected the first president, and we had our first meeting January 77. So, and then it just took off from there. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. I always respect people who are willing to take, especially some of those like the extra lumps that are involved with some of the formation with that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm involved in a limited capacity with my state club, and I've seen a lot of the work that goes into that kind of stuff. And I, of course, have lots of friends that have helped, with NAFA and stuff like that. And people that don't do those types of, or don't offer to have those types of volunteer positions and help carry the torch, I don't think really fully understand how much work goes into all that.
Well, that's true. But the people who do understand it really appreciate it. They really do. And in most clubs of any kind, 90% of the work is done by 5% of the people. Probably the reason I got elected president is because nobody else wanted to do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I know that's what happened to me when I was elected president of NAFA. They nobody else wanted that job. And I have a saying that I never had an enemy in the world until I became the president of NAFA.
That's fitting.
Yeah.
Fitting. Yeah. We're an interesting bunch. That's for sure. There's no doubt about it. As far as that goes, it's every falconer's got 100 opinions about 100 different things,
and they're all individuals and very staunch in their beliefs. And I mean, it's not a cult or religion, but it's closing in on that.
Well, yeah, that's a good way of putting it, probably. Yeah, we can be a little fanatical when it comes to certain things. That's for sure.
Yeah. And fanaticism is generally bad.
Well, I mean, we're also very passionate, and that's sometimes that's just what happens when you have a bunch of passionate individuals that you get involved in one little niche thing, and all of a sudden, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, I'm happy though that you took on those roles and were willing to be the proud veteran, so to speak. That in that situation.
Well, it had to be done. It had to be
Well,
done.
yeah, sure.
And so people don't realize the benefits that these state and national and international clubs are for falconry.
Mm-hmm.
Most falconers just assume it just happened, that they, got all kinds of regulations and so forth that made falconry attainable, or even legal.
Well, and that's, I mean, we as human beings, I think, are so kind of, what have you done for me lately in a lot of ways, and very short-sighted. And it's hard for us. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, our country itself is just so young compared to so many other countries in the world. And a lot of the things that, it seems like, there's a lot of people that just kind of brush off a lot of things that didn't even happen 100 years ago. I mean, it's like not necessarily brush off, but don't fully understand the gravity of some things that happened not that long ago.
Yeah, but our country is not only new, but in the early days, every country was a monoculture, and the United States is the last thing from a monoculture.
Right.
And so that's part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as it pertains to kind of how things evolved with falconry and how everything, is kind of developed in our country with it's all kind of just, I don't know, we're a melting pot anyway. And, there's so many different, like you said, types of personalities and everything that are involved in all this that, I mean, there's always bound to be some degree of a little bit of conflict. But like you said, I mean, that's why these organizations were formed, though, is to be the voice of the majority, not necessarily the minority, in a lot of those things. So, I mean, as far as, some of the early guys that you had experiences with, though, getting into falconry, I mean, did they help out with a lot of the formation of this stuff also, or?
Well, yeah. The two people here in Pennsylvania that were the most involved other than me was, three actually. Bill McBride, and I don't know if you've heard that name before. He's passed on now, but he was probably 10 years older than me, and he passed away 2 or 3 years ago, and I miss him dearly. But he was a big influence both on me and the club because he was elected vice president at that time. And the other falconer who I had here in northwestern Pennsylvania with me, Rod Gerline, he became the Western director. State was divided west, central, and eastern director, and he was a Western director. And then a guy in the east named Mark Plotter became really involved. So those are the three local people who were really involved in the formation and starting and progress of the club. Yeah.
Gotcha. So in the midst of all of this, then, how did some of the evolution in your personal falconry take place, kind of juggling all of this different stuff and then your veterinary practice and everything else? What did you, what kind of path did you end up taking with some of the different birds that you flew and stuff?
Well, I believe that you fly the bird that you have game for. And so I, of course, started off with red tails and Harris hawks. And because I live in the east here, and we do have rabbits, squirrels, and pheasants, but that's it. There really isn't anything else to fly here. There are ducks, but where I live, right on Lake Erie, there's ducks are in pretty big water. You don't go hawking on Lake Erie, okay? So, but anyhow, but then I did fly Cooper's hawks, Merlins, a lot of Merlins, and because we could find game for them. And I did have somebody loaned me a peregrine, and so I did do some duck hawking out west with that for a while, and then I had a New Zealand falcon, which was a great experience. And I flew her, and she was the most versatile bird I've ever had. She caught everything from meadow voles to jackrabbits to pheasants, ducks, quail, everything, woodcock, everything. She was just amazing. And I gave her to when somebody told me that she was too valuable to fly, I gave her to a breeder in British Columbia, a guy I met at the Canadian National Falconry meet, and he hybridized her with gyrfalcon semen and sold her to the Arabs, and they loved those offspring because they would catch these hubaro. Because I don't know if you know about New Zealand falcons, but they are a cross between a goshawk and a gyrfalcon is what they are. Real long tail, real short wings, but falcon. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they were really, she was really amazing. If I could ever get another one, I would.
Yeah, I've heard some about them, but there's not very many people that you hear about having a lot of necessarily like tons of success with them. There's a few here and there, but they're definitely not a falcon that you would think about taking jackrabbits or something, though.
Young jackrabbits. Okay, he took bunnies better than any Harrishawk or redtail, but she did catch some young jacks too. And but anyhow, you're right. I talked to the peregrine. What happened? I don't know. I want to keep talking about New Zealand falcons, but the peregrine fund had doled out some New Zealand babies they got from Nick Fox and raised, and uniformly nobody had any success with them. And I have some good falconers, really good falconers who I admire. And anyhow, I saw one at a Pennsylvania meet. A breeder brought one up, and I said, God, that thing looks like it ought to be able to kill something. It's, just built for killing stuff. And so I called Willard Heck down at the P Fund. I said, "Do you have any New Zealand falcons?" He says, "Yeah, I got one. It's a baby female." I said, "I want it." He said, "You what?" I said, "Yeah, I want it." So he expertly raised it till it was about 21 days. I flew out there and got the falcon and came home, and she was phenomenal. And I just think it was this particular bird, or they just, I don't know, but anybody who's seen her fly will tell you she was a phenomenal bird. Yeah.
And were you mainly just doing a straight pursuit style with it then, or were you doing?
Yeah. It was mostly off the fist to begin with, but every once in a while she'd take off the fist to fly a snipe, and the snipe would outfly her, and then she'd sort of make low, wide, waiting on circles. And the dog would flush another snipe, and she would chase it. But guess what? She never caught a snipe. They were so hard. And after about 2 weeks of doing that, she just gave up flying them. And I don't blame her.
Yeah, and after I can understand that. I mean, after seeing some snipe hawking myself, with some other guys,
with Merlins,
I mean, or even tiercel peregrines, and it's kind of just a short pitch or a small lower pitch, right above and stuff. Yeah, I mean, and it was hard enough for them to even catch them in the perfect scenarios with that setup, let alone straight off the fist pursuit.
Exactly. Yeah. No, they're tough.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's fascinating though. I mean, that I could probably talk about this for a while, just simply because, you don't hear about, some of these other species that are non-native, are termed exotic or however you want to, put it or whatever. There's not a lot of guys that you hear about flying some of these different species that have ever had tons of success with them. So whenever you hear about it, you gotta hear, a little bit more than just the basic, the basic, oh, well, I flew one,
Yeah. No, I had her I interviewed her 4 times, and she started laying eggs, and that's why they said she was too valuable to fly. So the one other interesting thing about this bird, and nobody believes me, but it's absolutely true. She never ate anything she killed. She would just cache it. That's it. And she was a hard imprint, obviously. And even in the summer, I'd keep her in a free muse outside, and you'd see chipmunks piled up in the corner. But if I put a dead quail in there, she'd eat it immediately.
Well, I mean, were you brave enough to save any of the stuff that she cached that she found later, or did you just end up tossing it?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. I did. If usually when I intentionally catch something, I saved all that.
Sure.
But she would. Yeah. So.
Yeah,
But
but
yeah, I
nothing.
don't know how long it had been in the muse before I found it. I just throw food to them in the summer.
Yeah, that's awesome though. I mean, that's cool though that you had that experience, and it seems like sometimes people just, yes, the falconer makes the bird and all that, but at the same time, I just think that there's some, I don't know if you want to call it luck, destiny, or whatever, but some people just end up with these birds that, I know there's kind of that saying that every falconer ends up with like at least one bird that's like that special, I don't know, just that
Right.
special pairing, I mean.
Well, yeah. Well, my belief is that, and I consider myself an at or slightly below average falconer. Of the falconers I really know well, there's most of the falcons I hang around with are better falconers than I am. That's for sure. Okay, but anyhow, I believe that there are some guys that just have what I call it. That is, they just get it. They understand the mind of a raptor, and they are calm, and they can get the very best. Their birds are always feather perfect, completely obedient, and killing machines. But every once in a while, you'll get one that I don't care what you do, the damn thing's untrainable. I'm serious.
Yeah.
I'm serious about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of a lot of people that will agree for sure. Yeah, I mean, and then there's some guys that'll say, well, no bird's untrainable and this, that, and the
Yeah.
other. And I'm like, well, teach their own. Yeah, there's no point in debating some of those things. But
yeah, I just don't think they've had enough birds.
Yeah, there's that too. But well, no, that's cool. I mean, it sounds like you had a pretty cool introductory, I don't know, kind of, I don't know what to say, crash course, but like you kind of got a nice introduction into falconry and lucked into a pretty cool situation then.
Yeah, no, the Philadelphia experience was phenomenal, and and of course then I graduated from veterinary school in '72. I went to my first NAFA meet in '74 when I was a member of NAFA, and these old timers introduced me to the rest of the quote upper echelon of falconers in the country, and the Henry Swains and the Harry McElroys and all these guys, and it was just it really helped me a lot.
Yeah. Well, and so I now that you mentioned that, it would be a good time to I guess get some good stories from you as far as just some of your overall experiences with some of these quote unquote, other first generation guys and everything that you learned from and had a chance to kind of, intermingle with there for that period of time. And I definitely want to hear about, how some of these guys were, because as you said, I mean, they're all gone now. I mean, like for the most part, they've passed, and we can't hear the stories from their mouths anymore. But it'd be really cool to hear, I mean, from guys like yourself that were fortunate enough to be able to know them for a while. What some of your experiences were, and get some of the stories maybe from secondhand is better than no hand. Yeah.
Well, the very first falconer I met, I was a freshman or sophomore in veterinary school. And I happened to be working at an SPCA at the time after school, and anyhow, a guy came in and brought a red tail in that he trapped that had jesses and everything on it. A captive bird that had gotten away from somebody, and he trapped and brought it. And his name was Cornelius McFadden, Corny McFadden, and he was a bigger than life guy. I don't know if you've heard stories about Corny, but he was, oh my God, no matter what it was, he could bully buffalo or talk his way into or out of anything. He was just phenomenal. And he had an entourage of lackeys who would wash his car and clean his mews and give him pigeons and whatever, he would just, so he was just, his personality, you had to love him, but, well, no, I take that back. You either had to love him or hate him, because some of the other upper echelon that was more his age, not my age, but his age, which was, 20 years older than me, I guess, maybe. He died in 72 when I was a senior in veterinary school. And anyhow, but Bob Stabler, who's one of the main guys, he had nothing good to say about Corny. And he said that Hal Webster would deal you the ace of hearts, and Corny would deal you the nine of spades. But I heard also that Stabler was hiding a peregrine from Corny. Corny was over there having dinner, and he says, I went to that. Bob said, I went to that peregrine eyrie, and somebody had plucked it clean. So, oh, man. Anyhow, the Kinnearsville Cliffs, they were called. There was an eyrie there, and that's where the local falconers got their peregrines back in the late 60s, early 70s, before they were endangered and everything. And Bob had taken one and had it in his basement. Corny said, hey, I want to go take a peregrine from that eyrie. He says, yeah, okay. He said, well, I'll take you there tomorrow morning. So Corny came over for dinner, spent the night. The next morning they went out, and the eyrie was plucked. There wasn't any birds in it. Well, Corny never knew that Bob had the only one that was left in that eyrie in his basement, right below where Corny spent the night sleeping in the guest bedroom. Well, there was a lot of that stuff, and it still goes on today,
Yeah, I mean, good luck getting guys to just outright tell you, where a goshawk nest is, for example.
Yeah,
and I mean, and some of the stuff is like, well, rightfully so. I mean, it's a lot of work locating nests and stuff sometimes, and there's a lot of grueling effort that goes into marching through like tons of forest and looking for sign and narrowing down getting the leads to even where they might be in the first place, and so on and so forth. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a lot just to ask somebody like, hey, where's your goshawk nest?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I get why someone might, want to be a little secretive, but it's hilarious that, is sharing basically the same room with one of these birds. It's hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, But that was Corny. And like I said, we'd go in Philadelphia in the middle of the night at the bridges that went over streets with long nets catching pigeons, and the cops would stop, and Corny said, oh, the mayor said we could do this. He's a good friend of mine. And the cops said, okay, go ahead. Corny could, and he was a huge man. He was big, about 6'5", Scotsman with probably weighed about 250, and he was just impressive all the way around. So anyhow, and then Jim Rice was there at that time too, and he was the exact opposite of Corny. He was the perfect gentleman, soft-spoken, very, very worldly, and very just the nicest, sweetest man you'd ever want to meet, and would never raise his voice about anything. And so anyhow, they were polar opposites, but they'd all go out and fly their falcons at bag pheasants, so.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's without that kind of diversity in a hunting group, it would probably be pretty boring. I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like going out with other guys every weekend that I was exactly alike, or exactly like. I mean, we all have our similarities, but part of the reasons why we're different is part of the reasons why it's so fun just to give each other crap so much all the time.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Love-hate relationships are wonderful, I think.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Well, what's another one then? I mean, you have I mean, I know that there's more guys than just that you.
Well, you got to remember that back then I met Corny in 68 or 69, I can't remember, and he died and all my time was spent in Philadelphia. Then when I went back home to northwestern Pennsylvania, which is 450 miles from Philadelphia. I mean, you couldn't be further from Philadelphia and still be in Pennsylvania and any other places. And so it was just Rod Gerline and I. That's who it was until we formed the club. So I never had any connection with the old gang in Philadelphia until after we formed the club. And it turned out that Jim Rice did join. Corny McFadden was dead. Bob Berry, who was another big long winger and well-respected and fantastic falconer and breeder, and the first person, I think, to breed goshawks in the United States. And anyhow, he never joined the club, so I didn't get to hang around with him. But his protégés did, and they became fast friends of mine. And so you have to talk to them about. Maybe I think Seth may have given you Dan Smith's name too, and Dan was a protégé of Jim Rice, and he could tell you a million Jim Rice stories, but he spent his whole childhood sitting on Jim's porch saying, "Take me out, take me out, take me out."
That's funny. Well, so I mean, as far as other stories, then, like, I guess we can go back to your personal falconry then, and I do want to get at least one or two good stories of just some of the more memorable hunting experiences and flights. And I mean, you've already talked about, of course, the New Zealand falcon and stuff, but I mean, what were a couple of the more memorable birds or flights that you had, in your experience?
Okay. Now, again, I'm going to stretch my credibility here, but I have two witnesses. Probably my favorite falcon are Merlins by far. Okay. They're just so cool. And, anyhow, I usually just catch them in the fall, fly them, and let them go in the spring. That's what I normally do. But one was so good, just so good, that I interviewed her 4 times. And with this bird, I was out in New Mexico with Mark Plotter, one of the guys I mentioned earlier, and a good falconer out there in New Mexico. And his name is Pete Youngerman. Anyhow, we were flying out in the desert, and my Merlin took on after a white-winged dove, and they fly a long ways. And so it was out at telemetry range, and this was way before GPS stuff. This was, and I had a little micro transmitter about the size of your little fingernail on the thing, and a Yagi antenna on a thing. On an RB4, if you know what that is, the RB4, So anyhow, it was out of telemetry range. So we started driving, and about every half mile and Pete said to me, "Don't you have a omnidirectional antenna for your truck?" And I said, "No." So, man, if we had one of those, we wouldn't have to stop every minute. We just drive around in circles, and when we got a signal, we could stop looking. We could start looking in the right direction. I said, "Oh." He said, "I have one at home." He said, and we tried. He said, but let's go to my house, and I'll give you my Yagi, or my omnidirectional antenna, and you can have it, and hopefully you'll find her." So I said, okay. So we drove 15 miles now remember, this bird had been interviewed 3 or 4 times. I drove 15 miles back to his house. He gave me the omnidirectional. I put it on top of the truck, and just to see if it worked, I turned on, beep, beep, beep. I get a huge beep, and that freaking Merlin is sitting in a tree right above my truck. She followed that truck 15 miles, and to Pete's house. So that's the absolute truth. And Pete and Mark will both to this day verify that. They're still alive and of sound mind.
I believe it. There's a guy in particular that I know that was flying a peregrine at one point. I believe it was. I can't remember. Is either peregrine or prairie or something. Anyway, same kind of deal. Was trying to track it, lost sight of it or whatever, and then was holding out his window. He looks out his window and the thing's following alongside his truck.
That's right. Falcons are smarter than most falconers. That's for sure.
Yeah, they're very smart for sure.
Yeah, that Merlin though, I called her. I named her Caper because I caught her in Cape May, and she was just unbelievable. I'll never have another bird like her. And her and New Zealand were my 2 favorite birds ever.
Yeah. So you think that was those 2 birds were kind of like in that special bird like category that we were talking about earlier?
Yeah. I have one. I had one other bird, which was a Passage Tiercel Harris hawk. But I had him in my later years, okay, and I had him for 7 years, and I gave him to a falconer buddy of mine only because he was boring. I mean, our son lives in Arizona, and so we would spend our winters in Arizona. I was semi-retired or retired, and I could spend 3 months in Arizona. And that bird, you'd only hawk for 5 minutes before he caught a quail or a rabbit. And I'm in the last 20 years, I've been a 1 kill a day guy. That's it. I know in my younger days I was a game hog, but not. I grew up, and anyhow, so I mean that was it. He was boring. It would take 5 minutes, and you had to go home. So I gave it to somebody else. Let him be bored.
Well, I think there's a lot of people that probably line up to have that problem of boredom. That's
boredom because it just was over.
I don't know. There's
talking about falconry now, nothing else.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No. I got you. No, there's a couple of people though that, like I said, I can think of right off the top of my head that would love to have that 5-minute boring problem as far as their falconry goes, for sure. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, no, that's cool though. I mean, like I said, it's, as far as the other aspect of things, though, before we circle back again, and as far as your veterinary practice, I mean, what have been some of the more, I don't know, like impactful things that you've learned over time with your veterinary practice and things like that when it pertaining to a lot of this stuff?
Well, I've had a more diverse practice than 90% of the veterinarians. I started off in a mixed animal practice. We did farm animals, horses, dogs, cats, everything. And then I went into a small animal practice, and I was the only one around doing birds at the time in the area. So I got a lot of birds. And because of that, I did the zoo. And the Erie PA Zoo is a small, under 500 specimen zoo, but it's amazing. It's always ranked one of the top zoos in the country, under 500 specimens. And so I got to see everything from parakeets to pachyderms there. We had giraffes and bears and all the lions and tigers and jaguars. And we raised polar bears, and we raised leopards, and we raised giraffes. And that was very diverse. And also, I did a lot of work on non-game species with Game Commission. So we had an osprey release program, we had an otter release program, we had a barn owl release program. And so between falconry, the Game Commission, I did rehab on everything. I mean, I rehab birds, of course, and every time they'd get a orphan bear cub or a bobcat with a hit by a car and a broken leg, they'd bring it to me, and I'd fix them up and as best I could, if I could. And so I mean, our kids have had everything you can think of in our house, So I've just had a wonderful, wonderful career. I just loved every minute of it. I hated, however, being a business owner. I couldn't stand it. They don't teach you how to be a business owner in veterinary school. They only teach you veterinary medicine. So, but anyhow. So, but that's I've had all kinds of experiences. I don't know if I can even come up with one off the top of my head. Yeah.
Well, as far as some of the more valuable lessons that you learned though while you were practicing veterinary medicine, and it doesn't necessarily have to pertain to raptors, I guess, but what were some of the more important things that you felt like you learned, like in the middle of your practice?
Well, I think the thing that I learned, and it took me a while to learn it, but I did learn it, is listen to the owner, but verify. The owners think they know what the problem is, whether they're falconers or pet owners or horse owners or farmers, it doesn't matter. They think they know what the problem is, but you have to listen to them. You can't brush them off. But you have to really critically assess what they're telling you. And that's the best. You have to listen, and you can't assess unless you listen. So I guess that's one of the main things I learned. Because the animals can't talk. You
Well, you hope they don't. Anyway.
Well, yeah. And when they do, they'd probably lie. So
Yeah, there's a whole other.
my dog lies all the time.
Yeah. Well, I have 2 dachshunds, so I get lied to constantly. Also,
Yeah. I've had one. I had one of those. Oh, yeah. I see you had. Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank, but from New Jersey, the Doxy breeder.
Teddy.
Yeah, Teddy Moritz. That was it. Yeah, because
Mm-hmm.
she was in Jersey. I was in Pennsylvania, and she's the one who started that Doxy craze. And of course, I got one. Everybody else did too. I got one, and I had an old female Harris hawk at that time. And boy, if that Doxy didn't get a rabbit up in about 15, 20 minutes, that hawk would go and just fist bump her right on the back and make her get going.
Yeah. Some have a little bit more patience with that than others. That's for sure. Yeah, no, that's funny. I mean, did you and while we're on the subject of dogs, then did you run any other dogs regularly?
Oh yeah. I've always had retrievers, pointers, and that one dachshund. That's what I've had. Yeah. The last dog I had died at 15, or I euthanized her at 15 for issues, but she hunted until she was 13, and she was amazing. But it took her 5 years to get that way, but she was amazing. I've had Labrador retrievers, golden retrievers, pointers, English pointers, and German shorthairs that I hunted with. I never hunted with a beagle. I never felt the need to use a dachshund for that.
Right. Yeah. I know for me, it's become a staple. I can't imagine hunting without dogs anymore. Especially it's good to have a group of friends that you can rely on to help beat for you. But there's going to be times though where they're not going to be able to. So it's nice to have a couple of extra people there, or a couple extra animals there, I should say, that'll be more than happy to do it for you. And then not only be happy to do it for you, but don't want to stop either, usually.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I don't know if they're big anywhere else, but in the East here, these English field trial cockers are a big dog. Seth has them. Mm-hmm. And the person who started those was this Rod Gerline guy I met, who's been a big influence in my life. I met him in 72 when he called up because he had a sick hawk. Anyhow, he's the first one who started those, and people saw his dogs and how great they were. And now that's probably the most popular dog for short wings going now in the East. Yeah.
Yeah, they're a cool dog, in the right application and the right settings and the right amount of, the size of the hunting spot and so on and so forth. I've got a couple of friends that have them as well, and they're a nice dog. I like them. I if I was in a slightly different area, I would possibly lean towards that direction as well. But for where I'm at, dachshunds are pretty much where it's at. I also have 2 Vizslas, but that's, if people have heard me talk about that, multiple times now. They're Vizslas. I love them as well. But for where I'm at, honestly, dachshunds are really hard to beat. Dachshunds and Deckers and Decker Terriers and stuff like that. So.
No, that's the thing is you have to have the hawk and the dog for the game that you have and the conditions that you have. And that shows a level of maturity for you. I'll tell you that.
well, and sometimes it takes us a minute to get there, but yeah, I've, like I said, I think once again, when you make decisions like that early on, just enough to be dangerous. And then, as time goes on, you're like, well, I still love these dogs, but I obviously didn't make the best decision. And, it's one of those things where instead of continuing to try and fit the square peg in the round hole, sometimes you just have to admit that, well, okay, wasn't the best decision, but I'm not going to make it again. I'll just go this other route now, it's just,
yeah. Well, yeah. The other thing I forgot to mention, and I don't know if it's relevant or not. I was lucky enough when I first came into practice, I was in mixed animal practice, I told you, but then I went to the small animal practice, and there was 3 other guys in the practice, and they were running a 3-man practice, and they were just worked to the bone. And so they added me, but they kept it a 3-man practice. So, and then when I became a partner, which was just a couple of years later, each of us got 13 weeks a year off. Okay. We ran a 3-man practice with 4 guys. So each guy got 13 weeks off. You had to use 2 of those weeks for continuing education, but the rest of the 11 weeks, you do whatever you want. So I traveled out west every year for a long time. I got to hawking, at least, and my family, I'm afraid, well, they like going hawking anyways, my son and my wife and daughter. But anyhow, I'd go out west, Midwest, Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, every year for 3 or 4 weeks, and then Arizona, New Mexico for 3 or 4 weeks. So besides the rabbit and squirrel hawking and pheasant hawking here in Pennsylvania. So I was lucky enough to be in a practice where they valued time off, and I got a chance to do that. And that's not the case with most people in any kind of practice or job worksite. Yeah.
I know for me, it would be hard to go back to a job where I was working more than 3 nights or 3 days a week again, because the flexibility of being able to go hawking or do whatever else I need to do those other 3 to 4 days a week is it becomes invaluable, and you can't really replace that with any kind of money or anything else, And so, I think there's a lot to be said for that. And there's a big reason why a lot of the guys that do, pest control or abatement and things like that really, bust ass, for most of the summer and stuff to save up enough money to where they don't ever have to work those first 3 or 4 months of the hawking season and stuff after that. And there's a lot to be said for those things. If this is something that you value, for sure, and having that flexibility where if you wanted to fly something different that you can't fly in your own area, but you can, go out west for a few months and be able to fly, a long wing or something, or even like a golden eagle or something that you couldn't be able to fly, out east, very practically. And I mean, I think that is applicable, because there's a lot of people that kind of become slaves to their careers and stuff. So
the gold handcuffs, they call it. But but I was very fortunate in that mine wasn't like a 3-day week. Mine was, I would get a month off 3 or 4 times a year. Okay, and as a result, the practice, the 4 of us bought a motorhome, and nobody could use it at the same time because the other guys were always working when you were off. So I could take the family and go, and in the summertime we did family things because it wasn't hawking season, but in the spring and fall, and that's what we were doing. That's where we were hawking, in the motorhome, and it was a family affair. It was nice.
No, that's cool, and it sounds like that was you're in a group with a group of guys that were pretty like-minded, and when it comes, I mean, that's kind of what you have to have sometimes, whenever you go into business with people and stuff.
Well, we were like-minded in that family time meant more to us than money. Because when you didn't work, you didn't get paid. You got paid on what you did, Sure. But we couldn't have been more diverse as far as philosophy, religion, hobbies. But we had that family orientation and times worth more than money ilk,
Sure. Well, and before we kind of start to wind this conversation down a little bit, like I want to go back a little bit though, and just see if there's any other things that you can, I don't know, think of, or any kind of other experiences that you had whenever it came to some of the early days of a lot of this, and that we didn't touch on, or any other trains of thought that we didn't kind of get a chance to go down, when it kind of came to, some of the early days and the, like, kind of like that true secondish, first leading into secondish generation of falconry here in the States. I mean, is there anything else that you want to touch on?
One of the differences that once the rigs come in, the sponsorship program came in. Mm-hmm. And that's been something that's been a problem. A lot of good falconers who are really good at falconry are not the ones who want to become sponsors. So that's one thing. And the trouble is that a lot of the this is not naming any names. It's not a generalization, but some of the sponsors are pet keepers and so forth, and so they beget a generation of what I call non. I'm not an elitist. Falconers, I don't care what you fly, but you have to take wild game. That's what you have to do. And there's a lot of people who sponsor people who don't do that, and that's not good. And there's a lot of good falconers who do that or aren't willing to sponsor somebody, and that bothers me too. And to that end, I've had, in my entire life, I've had 2 people I sponsored only because the first one, I had a rule, and the rule is you had to come hawking with me for a year before I would sponsor you the next year. And only 2 of them did it. And the next year I sponsored this guy, and he was phenomenal, a way, way better falconer than me. And do you know who Steve Martin is?
Yeah, I know the name.
Okay, yeah. He's the bird guy at Disney and all that stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great falconer. Well, this guy, Rob Jules is his name, was my apprentice, and he is now, he lives in Florida, and he's now Steve's main trainer, and he trains his trainers. So this guy could train dogs, horses, falcons. It doesn't matter. He could train anything. He had what I call it. He just had it. He gets it. And then the other one was a falconer who showed up to go hawking the year. So I said I would sponsor her the next year, and I helped her catch her first red tail, and I took her to the rabbit fields where I knew there was rabbits and I knew she'd be successful. But then I went away for the winter, and I'd come back for the whole winter, and I'd say, well, how many, did you catch any rabbits? Nope, never caught a rabbit the whole time you were gone. I said, oh man, that's terrible. So I made her get rid of that bird. And it was a good bird because I took her out like 5 or 6 times and she caught a rabbit every time with that bird. It was a great bird. And I said, you got to get rid of that bird because you won't learn anything by interviewing that bird. And so she reluctantly did, and she caught her own. I admit she caught her own bird, but she never caught a thing with it. And then she wanted me to say I would raise it to general, and I said no, not until you start catching game. I'm not going to do it. And so that was probably 20 years ago, and I still get a Christmas card from her every year saying, "For your forever apprentice." And it's not because she's a woman. It could have been a guy. This is not a male-female thing. She just, if you didn't take her by the hand, she didn't do it. Mm. And, so that was it.
Yeah. I mean, I do understand what you're saying, and I know there is a very wide varying of opinions as far as that kind of stuff goes. But I do agree that there's a very mixed bag as far as, just what the standards are, from one person to the other.
I think the main thing you have to, when deciding whether to sponsor someone, is what their level of desire is to do it. And by requiring that they go hawking with me before I sponsor them, I think is reasonable. It's not unreasonable. They don't want to spend the time coming hawking with me, maybe once or twice a year instead of, you don't have to come every day, but if I go on the weekends, you can get a weekend off to do it. So I don't think that's an unreasonable requirement. I really don't.
No. And that's probably part of the reason that I don't know if it'll probably be a long time before I'd ever consider sponsoring anybody because of a lot of those said requirements too. Like I wouldn't require, anything of anybody that I didn't have to go through myself. And I did that exact same thing. I got out with the group of guys here for a whole year, and before I felt like I earned my sponsorship, and then same deal. I mean, it's getting out at least 3 to 4 times a week, and so on and so forth. And the expectations of me, I felt they were kind of high, but at the same time, that's the way it should be.
Sure. No,
yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. And so whenever, like right now, I can't dedicate the same level of time commitment to someone that I would expect them to have of me. I can't guarantee that all the times that I can get out with somebody and take somebody under my wing are going to be the same times that I have available. So I mean, like it's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, so I'm just not going to sponsor anybody for a while. And it's not because I don't necessarily want to ever sponsor somebody, but I hate hypocrisy, and I'm not going to be hypocritical in my expectations of somebody else whenever.
No. You can't ask them to do more than you're willing to do, right?
Exactly. So, but I personally think kind of after being in South Africa and seeing how their system works out there and stuff, I think some degree of like a hybridization between our system and theirs would probably be kind of neat, but I don't really know the perfect way to go about it. It's
yeah. No, I know. That's each individual, and you know how much time you have to give, and you know how much information you have to put forward, or at least, I don't know. It's a problem. Getting a sponsor is a problem, and but if we want the sport to continue, we need people to join.
Sure. Well, and I mean, was there a massive amount of pushback that you saw whenever those regs were introduced, or did everybody kind of somewhat mostly agree that it was for the best?
No, I agree. That because, but the problem is, in order to be a sponsor, all you have to do is be a general falconer. And I'm not saying you should. What I'm saying is the requirement to be a general falconer is possess a bird for 2 years. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think that we still have. My problem is the good falconers that I know. For some reason or other, they just. I don't have time for a falcon. I'd rather be hawking and blah 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 blah. Okay. And the people who are, walk around in the medieval fair with a falcon on their fist are the ones that are sponsoring people. I'm sorry if I offended somebody. I don't care.
Well, yeah, I mean, and then that's the thing too, is, I mean, there are some people that do actually hawk and actually do actively hunt that are in those situations.
Right.
But once again, not everyone is the same in their approach with things. So.
Right. But if they're doing both those things, you probably don't have time to sponsor somebody.
Well, that's and there you go. I mean, yeah, it's a double-edged sword all the way around. But
well, you can cut me off whenever you want to. I've had, but it came into my brain. You said about the thing. I couldn't remember the second thing that was really.
Right. Yeah.
And it was that same Merlin. Caper, so many Merlins have been killed by Cooper's hawks here. I mean, falconers, Merlins.
Oh, okay? Yeah.
And I've had it happen to me. I mean, in fact, this bird, Caper, was killed by a Cooper's hawk, okay, after her 4th, 5th season, something like that. Anyhow, but that bird, I used to go to a pheasant farm because they were loaded with starlings there, just loaded with starlings with the Merlin. Of course, when you've got starlings, you've got Cooper's hawks, okay? And I knew the risks, but anyhow, I was there one day flying starlings, and this Cooper's hawk came out, and this Merlin just started bombing that Cooper's hawk. It just kept bombing it. And it forced it actually into, there was a building with a fence, a fence keeping the pheasants in, an enclosure. And it bombed that Cooper's hawk right into the corner, to the point where I went over and picked up the Cooper's hawk. Okay. And so I come home and I said, Jan, my wife, I said, look what Caper caught today. And it was an immature female Cooper's hawk. So I had the exact opposite with her, but she ended up getting killed by Cooper's hawk because she was too bold. Yeah.
that is bold.
Yeah.
That is bold. Yeah. Anybody that's flown Merlins or Kestrels eventually has a Cooper's hawk experience.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
And Coopers are one of my favorite birds too. I mean, they're the most versatile, vicious things in the world.
Yeah, they still remain an enigma to a lot of people, including myself. But that's the whole other conversation in and of itself there too. But
yeah, well, my wife says when I have one, I act like one. So I don't get one very often anymore that I don't have a dog. I don't get one at all.
That's hilarious. How many? So out of curiosity, how many coops have you flown? And was it more passage or
all passage, and probably half a dozen. And I had one good one, a couple fair, and come that were untrainable.
Yeah. It seems like, I don't know, like there's some guys that feel like that it doesn't really, if your approach is right, then none of them are untrainable. And then of course there's other guys that are like myself that think, well, I think if you just got lucky into like the 10% of the ones that really are trainable. But,
that's right. Right. No, I think, no. And the one good one I did have, I never intermewed a Cooper's hawk because I heard they were a pain in the ass to intermew. And so I took a trip to the Eastern Shore in the winter to hunt woodcock, and we were successful. We caught some woodcock and with another good falconer out there, Paul Burns and Billy Waterman. And anyhow, I said, well, I'm not going to intermew this thing. I let it go. And I shouldn't have, because that thing caught quail and pheasants and rabbits and woodcock. And I should have kept her, but I didn't.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the thing is, though, is I don't know. Like, if you do have a bird that is truly exceptional, I can see where the temptations lie, but, and, I mean, the whole intermewing thing, all the power to people if they've got a good bird and want to keep it or whatever. But that is another experience the following year, or whatever, that you're not learning.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Ain't no assurance you're going to get the same bird out that you put in that molting muse.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I mean, is there any other thoughts that I want to pick your brain as much as possible here, but I mean, I'm like I said, it's one of those things where, I mean, I know that you've been doing this for so long, and I don't know when we'll get the opportunity to do this again. So, I mean, if there's any other things that you have to share, feel free.
My heartbreak is that this year is the first year in over 50 years that I haven't had a bird. And I did have a bird, and then I had a bird. Seth, I had a Merlin, and Seth called me and he said, "Hey, I got this female Cooper's, if you'd like it." And I've been trying to catch a female Cooper's at home, and I didn't catch one. And I got a Merlin from Cape May, and I was driving home with this Merlin when Seth called me, and I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I got 5 days. I'll take them both." Well, hell, the Cooper's hawk was nicer than the Merlin. And Merlin was nice, but the Cooper's hawk was one of the nicest Cooper's hawks I've had. So I let the Merlin go. And then I got the diagnosis that my cancer had come back, and I had to spend 3 days a week at the Cleveland Clinic and blah, blah, blah. So I let her go. So this is the first season I haven't hawked since 1972, the first season. So but anyhow, my plans are to at least be in remission enough that I'm going to get a Merlin in the fall and fly next year.
Well, good. I mean, it's good to have goals, and always got to be working towards something.
Well, I'm going to tell you the ingredients of happiness, and I hate to be a philosopher, but I'm going to be.
Go for it. We'll consider this your piece of advice for people.
There's 3 key ingredients to happiness, and they are someone to love, something to do, and something to look forward to. That's it.
Yeah, no, it's very well, yeah, I mean, it's cut and dry, but it's very intuitive. I think I think that's a good point, especially that I think there's a lot of people that would be much happier if they could just find some degree of a purpose. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I feel fortunate for you anyway that like I said, you've had a lifelong, well, multi-purpose. I mean, you've had your veterinary practice, you've had, your falconry, and I mean,
Mhm.
like I said, your family and everything else. So, I mean, it sounds like if nothing else, you've lived a pretty fulfilling
Oh,
life.
oh, the best. I'm the oldest of 13 kids, and
Oh, wow.
and yeah, and farm people. That's the way it was back then,
Mhm.
and I couldn't have picked a better life. I wouldn't change one single thing.
Very cool. Very cool. Oh, and pertaining to falconry, I do want to go ahead and since we're kind of wrapping this up, what other piece of advice as far as just falconry related would you have to share with people?
Well, another colleague of mine who's passed away, and I'm so sad he's missing, Tim Kimmel. He was president of the Pennsylvania Club after me and president of NAF after me. And his advice to me, which I never forgot, is persistence pays off. If you go out and you're just frustrated because you can't find any game or the weather's not cooperating, it's too windy, and just be persistent, it's going to pay off.
Yeah.
That's what he taught me.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand with the whole, you're not going to catch anything from your couch type of.
That's right.
Yeah, type of mentality. So
yeah.
But, all right. Well, Ken, like I said, I feel like that I could probably keep poking, prodding, and probing, for more information from you, for a decent amount of time here. Maybe we'll get a chance at some point to do another one of these in person. It would be even cooler, I think. But
Great.
but I mean, unless you have, any other last things that you can think of to share.
No, I think I've covered everything that's in this feeble mind of mine, so we're all set.
Fair enough. Well, like I said, thank you. And, I know you've got always, some stuff going on and have a bunch of other obligations that you usually have to meet every week. So appreciate you. Like I said, taking this, close to hour and a half now to talk and share about your life. So, I mean, I appreciate you.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And then, it's my passion, but I'm not a zealot, I don't think, as falconry. I'm not one of these guys who moves to Hobunk, Nebraska because the chickens are there.
Well, it's a very important aspect of your life, but it's not all of your life.
No, that's right. It's just one piece, and it's a big piece, but there's other pieces that are just as big, if not bigger. Yeah.
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 All right. Well, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more here in a minute, but I'm going to go ahead, and if you're good with it, then I'm good with calling this good, and we'll hopefully do another one of these some other time in person.
Well, thank you. I'm good with it. Thank you. You're a very nice gentleman, and I hope we do meet in person sometime.
Strong arm Seth into hosting another little get together or something, and
there you go.
Make him feed us all like barbecue and stuff. And again,
yeah, great. Yeah.
All right. Appreciate you, Ken.
Okay, John. Thank you so much.